CBS Sports NBA writer, covers the Sixers, Michael Kaskey Blomain. He joins me right now here on the Sports Bash Live on 97.3 ESPN and the free mobile app. MKB, this is a bizarre one, man. How are you?
MG, I'm doing good, man. What's going on?
All is good. So last night I was there, and I did not see Ben Simmons, but apparently he was knocking on the door out front, and nobody let him in. The surprise nature of this, is it surprising to you that Ben Simmons has made the decision to rejoin the team?
No, Mike. To me, it's not surprising at all. In fact, I would go the other way and call it pretty predictable. The timing, obviously, that he decided to show up on Monday night when the team's playing a preseason game against Brooklyn without, letting them know that he was going to be there is surprising. But, I had a pretty strong feeling that once he started missing those games and those checks stopped coming in, and there's no sign of, a potential trade on the horizon, that, ultimately the decision will be made for him to come back. It's tough for anyone to want to miss out on the amount of money that he was, potentially going to lose. So now it's just going to be interesting, obviously, to see how they progress from him being back in Philadelphia.
Okay, so the first question is, he's back. Does that mean he plays? That doesn't necessarily guarantee he steps on the floor for this team again now, does it?
Yeah, I mean, technically no, Mike, but from everything that I've heard and been told is that the Sixers want him back to play in games. Like him coming back.
They want him back to play in games, but does he intend on acquiescing?
Well, the thing to me is if he just comes to Philadelphia and doesn't play in games and is still not fulfilling his contract, that money is still probably going to be withheld. Like I don't see a situation where he's in Philly but not playing and they decide to switch course and pay him the money for not playing in the games. So for me, if it's a move where he's back in order, is motivated by money in order to get that contract money, he's going to have to play in games and play up to, be professional and play up to his level until, probably a trade is ultimately made.
MKB. Out in front of the camera, the Sixers are saying they want him back. Behind closed doors, how will he be received when he walks into that locker room?
I think it's impossible that there's not going to be some level of awkwardness or, a little bit of drama and tension behind the scenes, especially when you consider some of the reports that came out in terms of, him basically being tired of playing with Joel, him obviously not letting his teammates fly out to see him in L.A. There was obviously not a lot of communication. Joel said last night that he hadn't talked to Ben since the season ended back in June when we were there and we watched him lose to the Hawks, Mike. So, I don't think it's a situation that's potentially not fixable at all, but I definitely think there's going to have to be some sort of a meeting and kind of a discussion between these players before they can go forward, or else it's just going to be a looming, kind of lingering awkwardness in that locker room.
Now, the two sides are supposed to talk today at some point. I mean, Ben Simmons has really not spoken to the organization at all. Do we anticipate hearing something more on this story today? Now, typically the Sixers would practice after a preseason game. They canceled that practice, presumably so that they could try to figure out what's going on here. So do you anticipate more news coming out on this front today?
I don't think so, Mike. I could be wrong, but I think you kind of just nailed it there. I think the fact that there's no practice today, no media availability, kind of shows that they're trying to figure out some things and obviously putting on a good face publicly about how they're going to move forward. I would imagine tomorrow, when practice resumes and there's media members in there, that someone, whether it's Doc, whether it's Daryl, Elton, or potentially even Ben himself, maybe, although I doubt it, I would guess at that point they'll probably make some sort of statement, but I would be kind of surprised if it came today at this point.
Right. I mean, that's going to be the interesting part, is that when Ben Simmons finally has to be put up in front of the media, how is that all going to be played out? I mean, do you anticipate that happening once he's back and he's saying, okay, I'm COVID tested, I'm ready to go? It's the duty of the team to put him out there, correct?
Yeah, well, it's part of his contract,
Correct.
too. He has the media obligations that he'll have to fulfill for sure.
So I guess my question moving forward would be, he comes back like nothing's happened really, and the Sixers have maintained, Michael, right, that they want him long term. But do you anticipate that this is just getting him on the court so that they can work on ways to get him out of here, or that they would realistically try to convince him to want to stay?
Yeah, that's a great question, Mike. And earlier in the offseason, I would have definitely said that it was the latter. They were looking for a trade. It didn't materialize, and everything I heard was that they were willing to, bring him back into the fold for both the short term and potentially the long term. Now, with the ugly public way these things have transpired, some of the things that have been said, I just don't know if there's a long-term solution there. I think at this point, if they're trying to get him back on the court, it's probably in the short-term interest for them because they are, quite frankly, better, despite his issues in the playoffs, especially in the regular season. They're better with him out there. He's their best defender, a great playmaker. He adds depth to that team, which already is looking pretty deep, by the way, based on these preseason games. So, I think they want to get him out there, obviously boost that trade value and wait to see, as we've talked about before, once the season gets started, it's a lot more likely that, potential trade offers will come. Teams will underperform. Players will be unhappy with their situation. And then there'll be, potentially guys will be available. And at that point, the Sixers want Ben out there. They want him playing, and then they'll have him to, decide where to go from there. But to me, at this point, it just seems difficult to imagine a scenario where they put all of this behind them and don't trade him at all and just move forward with him on the team.
You made an interesting point. What does a team with Ben Simmons look like? Because you said, they look like a deeper team now. So how does a team with Ben Simmons, how are they different from the team last year?
Mike, I don't know how much different they really are, but at the same time, I just think there's, if this Ben situation didn't happen, I think it would have been a really good thing for the Sixers to run back with the same team that they had last year that got the number 1 seed in the East that was, considered a legitimate contender throughout the season, obviously ultimately underperformed and was upset by Atlanta. But, as we've talked about in depth for years, the Sixers have been dealing with constant turnover year after year, new rosters, major moves, new front office people, a new coach. And it would have been, I think, a great opportunity to, grow on what they did last year. And if they could somehow put the awkwardness of the Ben thing behind them and focus solely on the court, I think there's just room for the team to improve as a unit. They'll get more accustomed to each other. Joel still is, going into his prime, and he looks to be picking up right where he left off last year. There'll be more, comfort level for the younger guys. Like I think Maxey looks like he's ready to take another step forward. Obviously Matisse, Isaiah Joe. So I think it's just a team that's going to be a little bit more cohesive, more developed and deeper if some of those guys are ready to take on a larger role.
Yeah, I mean, you have a situation where I was there last night. Joel, I mean, he looks like he's just getting better and better. Last night you look at a team that just had more shooting around Joel Embiid. I mean, is that a better recipe in the short term to say, you know what, Ben Simmons, we don't need you. We'll go with shooting, and we'll figure out a way to move you out of here?
It's tough to say that, Mike, because obviously Ben does still bring a lot to the floor. They'll need the defense at some point, as good as Danny is on that end, as good as Matisse is. Neither of them are Ben. I think they would benefit. They don't have a true point guard at this point that, Doc was trying to shoehorn Shake into that role. Tyrese Maxey obviously is a guy that has a super bright future and looks like a guy that will come in and score off the bench. But is he ready to be, a full-time playmaker and a point guard for a championship contender? So I think there is still room for Ben to come in and do what he does. But there is times also that they can say, hey, listen, long-term, this isn't necessarily what we need. We have these guys that we can surround Joel with. Joel's getting better at reading double teams, moving the ball. So I think we're seeing a blueprint of potentially how a post-Ben Simmons Sixers team could look so far this preseason. But in the short term with Ben's there, I think there's definitely still ways that they could, obviously find ways to use him while he's still on the team.
Michael Kaskey Blomain, CBS Sports is here, and obviously there's so many layers of this story. You have the situation where Keith Pompey reported the other day that Simmons does not intend to play a game for the Sixers, but Rivers remains optimistic. We kind of touched on that before, but if he doesn't play, right, and you mentioned, well, they can keep finding him. Can the team find him, or does that have to go to some sort of arbitration process? Does that get ugly, or does the league have to get involved? How does that work?
Yeah, Mike, I think unless there's some excused reason, if he has an injury or some sort of a medical clearance from the team doctors, at that point, obviously there would be, room for back and forth on the matter. But from what I've been able to tell, if he's fully healthy and in Philly and just doesn't want to play when the team wants him to play and he basically refuses to go out there, it's almost no different than, him being away from the team. He's still not rendering his services. He's still not living up to the contract. So, I could be wrong. I'm not speaking on 100% certainty, but in that situation, I'm pretty sure that the team can continue to, withhold the pay until he's actually out there on the floor playing in games.
From what you know, how far are they from finding a trade?
There's been no traction from what I've heard, Mike. Basically going from August before the initial report came out that Ben wouldn't be reporting when I was told that, the trade talks had kind of stalled for the time being. I've heard nothing to indicate that there's, been any rumblings elsewhere. Obviously there's some teams probably still interested, but it's, to me, a situation where you have to wait till the season starts. You have to see how this situation unfolds. Like, is he going to be out there playing? Is he going to not play? And I think at that point you'll see some of the offers come and pop back up. But for right now, they don't seem to be any closer to finding a deal than they were, a month ago or 6 weeks or whatever.
What do you make of, like, when you hear something like he'll play in Sacramento, doesn't care about that? Like, what does that kind of tell you about the mind, the frame of mind that he's in?
It just comes off kind of as a desperation thing. Like, if you're publicly saying you'd go to the Kings, who, no offense to the Kings, but they've obviously been a bottom barrel team for basically the past decade, haven't been a contender. If you're saying you're, openly willing to leave, that's how much you want to get away from Philly, who, mind you, has been a contender for the past handful of seasons, and you're putting it out there that, you'd even go to the Kings. I think it just shows a level of, how badly he wants to get out of Philly. And for me, that's why I don't think the situation has a long-term resolution. Even if he does, he's back in Philly, even if he does ultimately get back out on the court with his team, I feel like it's just too far gone at this point, that ultimately they're going to have to find something, somewhere to move him, whether that's Sacramento, Toronto, or New York, or anywhere else.
What do you make of the way that he returned last night? I mean, essentially, he's outside texting Elton Brand, not him, somebody saying, hey, Ben's outside. He needs someone to let him in the building here. I mean, so it's still at the point where Ben Simmons is not ready to talk to these people.
Yeah, Mike, to me, it's a set in for, exchange text with a couple people with the team and whatnot. It just seems like it's Ben basically still trying to do things on his own terms. Not telling the team that he was going to, when or where he was going to show up, that he kind of just showed up and said, hey, I'm here. It's Ben still trying to, basically take whatever control in the situation he has and try to dictate things to the Sixers. That hasn't worked out, obviously, so far in this process. I don't see it working out for him moving forward. But like you said, it's not like he came back necessarily with his hat in his hand ready to make amends. He came back, completely motivated by the financial implications of his holdout, and he's still doesn't want to be here, doesn't want to be with the team. So it's going to be really interesting, obviously, to see how they navigate this over the coming days.
They play Friday in a preseason game in Detroit. They open up on Wednesday night. Will number 25 be on the floor in either one of those games?
I'm gonna say yes for the opener, Mike.
Wow.
I think I don't know.
What a turn of events this has become, man.
It's a total guess, but I just think if he's here, to me, that tells me that he's at least somewhat willing to try to hash things out for the time being so that he can recoup that money. And if he's here and they want him on the court and he passes his tests and he's healthy, I think we might see him out there.
Michael Kaskey Blomain is, of course, CBS Sports NBA writer, covers the 76ers. Were you there last night? I did not see you.
No, Mike, I was not there. I'm holding out for the regular season. Had some other duties to take care of before the season gets rolling.
They had a good meal last night, right?
I missed that. What were we talking?
Chicken parm. It wasn't bad. It was pretty good. It was a solid meal for a preseason game. I just went to pick up my pass. I actually went with tickets as just a regular Joe Schmo fan. But I said, hey, I picked up my tickets, and I said I wanted to see if Ben Simmons showed up. And, of course, he did. Ben Simmons follows me, right? Where I go, Ben Simmons follows.
Apparently, Mike. So I guess you better be there for the opener next Friday.
Right. Next Friday's opener against the Nets. Same setting as last night. Maybe it's the Nets that bring him in. There could be something with the Nets. We'll see. Would you do a Kyrie for Ben Simmons deal?
On paper, Mike, absolutely. But with all the other things going on, reports that he would potentially retire, he's due for, obviously he hasn't signed an extension yet, which means he could be a free agent. Obviously, he's not shown a willingness to stick with the team. So I think there's too much risk for Philly to make that move, although on paper it would work out well for both teams unless he, committed to sign an extension with Philly immediately. I think it's too risky of a move.
At the real Mike KB. Follow him on Twitter for the rest of this Ben Simmons saga and see how it all unfolds. The drama is right in front of our very eyes. MKB, I'll see you soon, man.
Thanks, Mike. See you at the center soon.
Yeah, man. That's Michael Kaskey Blomain, of course, our former Sixers insider for 97.3 ESPN.com. And he went national on us like most of our Sixers reporters do. They get hired from us. Paul Hudrick, he got hired away. Kevin McCormick, he got hired away. All those guys are doing so well.